doing. So with that grand start, let's get started with the theme sessions for the day. I'm Aishwarya Bandla from the N1 Institute for Health at the National University of Singapore, and I'm very glad to be moderating the first session on monitoring and wearable devices for COVID-19. So we have two very interesting talks, and the speakers will share their work. And after their talk, we will take the Q&A from the audience. So feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A box like you're doing now instead of the chat function. Our first speaker for the day is Anand Yadav, who will be joining us from the other side of the world. Welcome, Anand. He is a senior product manager at Philips General and Specialty Care business. Anand has a rich experience in innovation and commercialization of wearable solutions. Prior to Philips, Anand co-founded a Boston-based mental health startup, and he also has held numerous R&D and business management roles at various top institutes. Anand will talk to us today on the topic, a wearable solution for patient deterioration detection and clinical surveillance for COVID-19. Over to you, Anand.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
And you can see my slide?
We can, yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to join here. And as pointed out, I'm on the other side of the world. It's a little after dinner time, but rest assured I'm awake and very happy to engage with everybody. So I will be talking in basically two sections. First part of my talk will focus on talking about the patient deterioration. And then the second part, I'll talk a little bit about how that is also applied as a clinical surveillance during the COVID time, which is kind of interesting because when we developed the wearable solution, this was pre-COVID, of course, and at that point, nobody knew and we didn't know. But after we launched the solution, we realized that it would have a use for the COVID. And so that was a very sort of interesting use case. It just showed up and we hadn't actually thought about it. So I want to start with telling you a little bit about the bigger picture here, which is even before COVID, we knew that the healthcare spending has been increasing. Now, it certainly is in the US, but it is also in other parts of the world, and certainly in Singapore as well, I imagine, and whichever countries you are joining from. And one of the thing because of that, there's a lot of pressure on the quality, to improve the quality and keep the cost down just to make the healthcare accessible for everybody else. And so other piece of statistics in general care, which is a part of the hospital, what we define general care as general ward, med-surg unit, step-down units, even some parts of ED. So there has been a trend where patients have been basically been dying in general ward, and also overall in hospitals you have adverse events, and we've also seen increased patient to nurse ratio. Now that has been very significant. I understand in Singapore and some parts of Asia that's even more challenging, and a small increase in the patient really affects the quality of care. And so from patient deterioration perspective, what we have found both from literature and from clinical practice is that respiratory rate is the strongest indicator for deterioration. It's followed by heart rate and other signs. Yet it is the sign that's at the best case manually measured, or in the worst case simply guessed. And so there's a really a gap in the clinical practice that has been known for a long time, but there just hasn't been a way to address this. And so when we first started, developing the wearable solution, what we're really thinking at that point is that because a standard of care is so much focused on um, signs that are already too late, um, and that leads to really reactive care, which ends up in a lot of time, effort, and cost. How do we move that reactive care to proactive care? And so, and that's been really the philosophy behind thinking about the wearable solution. We, as I mentioned earlier, the trend has been because of increase in patients, there has been a push to move patients to a lower acuity as much as possible. So from ICU, as you know, it costs a lot of money. You move somebody to general care, costs a little bit less. And then if you can move them out to home, probably even costs a little less. So that has been the trend that we have seen. And from our perspective, providing an accurate, automatic, and frequent respiratory rate uh, really allows sort of a proactive focus on the healthcare, because your respiratory rate and heart rate are the earliest indicator of deterioration. And as I mentioned earlier, it's measured manually. But what we also find from literature is that uh, when it is manually guessed, it ends up becoming either 18 or 20 or 16, depending on which hospital, which where it is practiced. And that is just not true, because you can't just have a respiratory rate which is 16, 18, or 20. So to give you some quantification about the economic burden and the size of the problem, and by no means these are the only ones. There are now several areas where a value of respiratory rate, if you had a solution that could address that, could benefit a situation. But this is just to give you an example. The first one is the opioid-induced respiratory depression. You're probably familiar with it. If somebody goes into the surgery, there's a lot of pain. They've given opioids to really numb down the pain, but that also puts some patients at a risk of respiratory depression. And that in itself is a huge problem. It has also other problems like addiction, things like that. But overall, it's a big cost item where having a solution that could provide automated and accurate respiratory rate could benefit. Similarly, in sepsis as well, it's also a big problem. And if you had a good way to measure respiratory rate remotely, accurately, there's also a big benefit there as well. So with all that in mind, we actually is how we started developing our wearable solution, and we call this Philips Biosensor BX100. We got a CE mark for this product just back in April. And right around that time, we saw a huge spike or increasing COVID in US and of course globally as well. So I hadn't thought of, or we hadn't thought of that we'll be launching this time during the COVID, but it happened, and so we realized that a product like this could be useful there. So what it does is, from clinical standpoint, it measures the top indicators for deterioration, respiratory rate, heart rate every minute. And again, these are general care. You don't really necessarily need second by second. So every minute is sufficient, gives you a nice trend. And then in addition to that, we also provide contextual data. So things like posture, what is patient doing, and activity level, how active the patient is, and also ambulation, these patients walking or not walking. Now, if you think about, now I'll go back to that use case I mentioned earlier, the opioid-induced respiratory depression or post-surgical use case. If you have somebody who went into a hip and knee surgery, hip or knee surgery, for example, and to recover from the pain was given opioids, initially probably will spend most of the time lying down, and then as the patient recovers, probably a part of the therapy as well, to exercise, to take few steps, make the legs body strong so that eventually the patient can be discharged. Now we can track that. So not only we can track physiologically how the patient is trending, but also gauge how well they are recovering because of those additional contextual information. So this biosensor is worn on the upper left chest for up to 5 days. It is a single use, which kind of became very useful for the COVID times. The patients can shower with it, so that's not a problem. So, and in addition to that, what we knew early on, based on our experience with the first generation biosensor that we launched a few years ago, we learned a lot of great feedback in terms of how usable it needs to be, how it needs to fit into the workflow. And so we really did with this biosensor a few formative usability studies where we recruited a group of nurses from different departments, different levels, and really got their feedback. And we went back to another group, similar functions, another group with multiple different concepts. We did that testing. So these are 2 rounds of sort of formative studies, came with the final design that's in front of you, and then we did what's called summative usability to indeed confirm that it addresses the workflow needs. And particular things I want to just highlight is the orientation. It's designed in a way that is obvious which way it will go. It has the shape that fits really nicely on the body contour. It's very comfortable and small as well. And then we provided that the release liners that are numbered, so you can easily tell the sequence, but it's also designed to do one thing, which is to really minimize contact with the adhesive on the back that allows it to adhere to the body. And of course, we have this very small LED that provides a status of the device when you turn it on or when it is connected, giving indication for nurses when she can leave the room. And we also know that in hospital environment, you have patients who may have other devices. For example, some may have pacemaker or implanted defibrillator, or if you're in US and other countries where the cardiac telemetry is prescribed for non-cardiac patients, they might be wearing one. So we designed that in mind so that even you have patients with those devices, you can wear this, and that's not a problem. And the other thing is, how do you get the data from the biosensor to the display or to early warning score or wherever it needs to go? We developed a sort of scalable hub that allows multiple of these biosensors to connect to a single sort of Bluetooth router, which we call multi-patient bridge. And it's truly scalable. So you really need very few of these in a typical unit. And because it has a long range Bluetooth, the standard Bluetooth is, as you know, it's a 10 meter. This one goes up to 30 meters. So that allows really using fewer infrastructure to target a large area. And also it helps maintain a continuous connection. So much like a roaming feature on your phone, when you walk around, when you're on the phone, you could be walking around, you can still talk to the other person. Same thing here. The data from the biosensor will be continuously sent without interruption. The biosensor also has a local storage up to 4 hours. So if a patient happens to be outside of the range, it will store the data locally. When patient comes back into the range, the data is automatically uploaded. And designed in a way that this it will be initially installed by Philips, and really no additional work for either, definitely not for the clinical staff, and even for technical, there's a great user interface via which the IT and the biomids of the hospital, they can very easily look at the status of the device, can even do basic troubleshooting if needed, or do software upgrades. The installation itself is very flexible. We offer a number of options. So you could power this device via a standard wall outlet, or you could power it over the Ethernet. Either option is possible. And again, the data can be sent using the Ethernet or over Wi-Fi. So in terms of tying it all together, so as a solution, as a biosensor solution, we designed it such that to align with the quadruple aims really. So from clinical standpoint, as I mentioned before, it does measure the top indicators for deterioration, respiratory rate, and heart rate for basically any at-risk patients in lower acuity care. And where there's a lot of use for non-cardiac patients, where there's a lot of use of cardiac telemetry, this is a great alternative as well. From workflow standpoint, we know how busy, valuable nurses' time are. We made it so easy that if they go are doing their rounding, you can easily fit this in. It takes just a minute to apply and get it up and running. And so the setup is very really simple and easy. We even have graphics. So you have it comes with the user manual, but also have a visual instruction directly on the packaging. So there's any given time you know exactly what to do. Again, very simple. You just scan the barcode on the device or the package and the patient ID and turn on the biosensor and apply, and that's it. It takes care of everything else. From patient perspective, it's truly empowering the patient and supporting a full mobility because patients don't have to carry anything other than just wearing this device. It's a very small and discreet. And also because we provide the contextual measurements, that really allows you to not only look at the deterioration, which is where most of the focus generally seems to be in the standard care, but also on the recovery. And again, in certain cases, that's also important because if you want to discharge somebody, you want to also know not only how they clinically are doing, but also how they feel. Are they mobile? Are they ready to be discharged? So again, just to give you example, and by no means this is the exhaustive list of the use cases. As I mentioned, the post-op, post-surgical monitoring, where this could be very, very useful. We get a lot of interest for this in those use cases, sepsis as well, where by using our back-end IntelliView Guardian software, which can help to also calculate early warning score based on the data. So you could simply look at the real-time data, you could look at the trending data in the Guardian software, or you could do early warning score. And again, as I mentioned before, the non-cardiac telemetry alternative, because sometimes what happens if you're using the cardiac telemetry, there's alarming. You need an expert nurse trained to use cardiac telemetry, and it's not designed for ambulatory use case. It's bulky, so there are a lot of issues that if you don't need, if you truly don't need a cardiac telemetry, then this would be a great alternative. And of course, the automation of vital signs, respiratory rate in particular. We understand that this right now only has 2 out of 5 vital signs, which we are in the process of adding. But even then, I think frees up nursing time. You don't have to guess, or you don't have to count respiratory rate. And again, the data can go to EMR via our IntelliView Guardian software. So this is a high-level sort of architecture. You have patients wearing the biosensors on the left. The data will be sent over Bluetooth every minute into that the scalable hub multi-patient bridge. And the data from there goes into our backend, the IntelliView Guardian software, which then can display the data on several interfaces. One is a sort of the workstation. The other is a mobile client, and also spot check monitors. And from there, the data can then go to EMR or to the notification system. And again, if you have a case where you have a change in vital signs that indicates deterioration, and if you set up with early warning score, you may see a risk band change, and that may lead to a notification, which then allows hospital staff to intervene in time, avoiding really costly sort of interventions. So this is together with the Guardian software, this is a really powerful option to really early for early patient deterioration detection. And for any at-risk patients, that requires frequent monitoring. This is a great piece of technology that can be used. To just give you an example here, or sort of a story of a Mary. Again, she's been identified by her doctor as a candidate for the biosensor because she just went through a hip surgery and she's been given opioids. She's at risk of respiratory depression. Uh, the nurse during her rounding will apply the biosensor, very easy to apply. Uh, and as she makes a recovery, she may initially need some help from the nurse to walk around, just to make sure that she's doing some exercise all the time. There's data that's being coming in, and can be looked at to establish the trending. She makes recovery. Now she can walk on her own. A friend or family members comes to visit, and she's happy to do that. While she's doing that, it so happens that there's some change in her vital signs, causes her early warnings wristband to change. That then leads to a notification on a mobile device. The doctors have access to it, nurses have access to it. They can also look at the dashboard, and then because of that, now they can intervene early. Now that just saved everybody from a lot of troubles. Now she's making a recovery and on her path for discharge eventually. So that's overall the patient deterioration detection. And again, what we found was as soon as we launched, because of the COVID, the hospitals wanted to use it in the COVID. So let me talk a few minutes about that. So this is our first sort of customer in Netherlands who wanted to use the BX100 for COVID. And so OLVG is one of the major hospitals in the Amsterdam area. They have one of the biggest emergency department. As the COVID cases increased, they were seeing a lot of these patients. They were coming in, some had COVID, some were suspected of COVID, and they needed to immediately create this, what they call a sort of isolation wards. And so they created several of them. They limited access, and the nurses would have to wear a PPE to go in there. And one of the things they wanted to do was to remotely monitor the vital signs, particularly respiratory rate. And also they wanted to minimize the contact. So what they did was they used the BX100 biosensor, the Guardian software that I showed you earlier, and a VS30, which is a spot check monitor. Now, a spot check monitor, they only rolled in a few times. Obviously, most of the time they have the data coming in from biosensor. And so this was a clinical surveillance model, but they were actually also using on the Guardian, which was sitting obviously outside of the isolation ward, to look at the deterioration as well. So the most important, they wanted to remotely look at the data all times, minimizing the contact. The PPE itself is expensive, as you know, and so there was an opportunity to reduce the consumption of PPE and also decrease the infection by minimizing the contact between the patients and the nurses. And so they were the first ones to try, and they were very happy to use it. Of course, we've been since then now expanded into a few other places in Netherlands, and also now we're expanding into other countries as well. But this has been a great learning experience, and also very meaningful, because this COVID created a very interesting challenge. We couldn't deploy the solution via its traditional means. We had to come up with a whole different deployment plan to support this. So for example, the field local team had very minimal access to the hospital, number one. Number two, they were not allowed inside the isolation ward, number two. And then, so what happened was they had to create a scenario where they had to set up a solution in a staging area separately to get everything working. And then the hospital's IT staff would take some of the pieces and move it, for example, the infrastructure into the isolation ward. And again, us being remotely from the US, we were remotely collaborating with our field team, working with the customer. So this was a very interesting sort of scenario for us, but we were very happy that we were able to contribute, to the COVID sort of pandemic situation. So with that, I would like to just stop here and perhaps pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Anand, for sharing that awesome work. I'm sure the audience is buzzing with questions, so we are going to get back to that after Dr. John's talk. So our next speaker, like I said, is Dr. John Ho from the Little Red Dot. Dr. John is assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and the iHealthtech Institute at the National University of Singapore. And he has received numerous awards, including the prestigious National Research Foundation of Singapore's NRF Fellowship, the NUS Young Investigator Award. He was also recognized in the MIT Tech Review's 35 Under 35 Innovators Asia list, and also the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. His research focuses on development of miniaturized wireless bioelectronic technologies for healthcare applications. Let's hear from John on their recent work on remote monitoring of COVID-19 in Singapore worker dormitories. Over to you, John.
Hey, thank you, Aishwarya. All right, I want to thank all the organizers for putting together this wonderful event. And I'm sorry we don't have a chance to see each other in person this time, but I guess the online is the next best thing. So today I want to quickly talk about some of the work that we've done on deploying a remote monitoring system for COVID-19 in Singapore's worker dormitories. Now I know most of the audience is from Singapore, but there's some, for those who are not, the COVID situation in Singapore was quite unique in the sense that the demographics of the people who were getting COVID were very different between two separate populations. And so if you look at the local Singaporeans versus the dorm residents, these are foreign workers who are staying in more crowded conditions inside the dorms. The statistics are quite crazy. In fact, if you were to look at the plot of those two populations separated out, this is what it looks like. This is older data that stops in around mid-August, but you can see here that the overwhelming number of cases, they're so high that you can barely see the imported and community cases, were happening inside of the dorms in Singapore. And so in Singapore, there were almost two pandemics going on, one in the dorms and one in the rest of the population. And so this was quite a unique situation to Singapore. And as this was happening, one of the challenges was really to set up monitoring inside of those dorms in a way that didn't endanger those who were doing the monitoring. So one really important condition to monitor here was actually to use pulse oximetry. Now the reason for this was because in COVID there's a condition called silent hypoxia. It's an interesting condition where your blood oxygen drops down to dangerous levels, and yet the patient doesn't know it. Usually your pulse oxygen goes below 95. You know it. You feel dizzy, you feel nauseous. Uniquely in COVID, there's actually quite a few patients, a significant number of patients that experience this condition, and somehow they don't feel it. And there's different reasons. Scientists are still trying to understand why that happens. But for now, doctors just know that they see a large number of patients that have this condition. And so in a population where you have a high risk of being infected with COVID, it's important to monitor pulse oxygen so that we know whether or not the disease is becoming more severe. And so this was known at the time, and so the Singapore government acted on this. So they actually distributed tens of thousands of pulse oximeters among these migrant workers in order to kind of better understand their health. Now, for those who don't know, the pulse oximeter is a really simple device. Here's a short video to show what it actually looks like. It's just a device that you clip onto your finger. This is my finger. And inside this device, it's just simply at the heart of it, it's a battery and two LEDs, one that's red and one that's infrared. All it does is shine light through your finger and measure the amount of light passing through. And just looking at the difference between the infrared and red light passing through, you can actually measure the amount of oxygen in your blood. And the reason that works is because essentially oxygenated blood has a different amount of redness compared to non-oxygenated blood. And so by just measuring those changes in red, but not changes in infrared, those differences between that, I'm able to assess the amount of blood oxygen. So out of this simple device, you get essentially two numbers. One is the blood oxygen level, SpO2, in terms of a percentage. I'm very healthy, so it's 99%. And the other number is the heart rate, so 69 beats per minute. So this is a very simple device. And so tens of thousands of these were distributed. And there's a simple logistical challenge now. We have all these numbers that appear whenever we put these clips on, but how do we collect all these data and how do we begin to understand and act on it? And so that's where we kind of came in. This is one of those tens of thousands of oximeters that were procured. And so it turns out that these oximeters actually have a simple Bluetooth function built in. So while this is clipped on, it would actually transmit that data out into the air around you automatically, just by Bluetooth. And so this was designed to talk to different smart devices. If you had a special app, you could pick up that data. But in this case, we wanted to take this data and kind of catch it in the air and then centralize it into a single place where the person monitoring those dorms could assess everyone at the same time. And so we built a simple system within about 4 weeks to do this. And so this is the way the system works. The essential piece of hardware we used is one that you all may be familiar with. It's a Raspberry Pi. One of these really cheap, the actual board was designed to be just $10. So this entire system, including the LEDs, cost maybe $20. And so this is a simple kind of a IoT, Internet of Things device that's wirelessly enabled. So it has a Bluetooth module in it. It has Wi-Fi. It runs a full Linux operating system. And so using this really simple device, we programmed it in a way that could talk to these pulse oximeters and then catch that data as it comes out from multiple residents at the same time and transmit that out to the cloud. So the way this works, this is Bluetooth. This talks to this IoT device that has both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. It takes that data, processes it a little bit, and then transmits that out to the cloud by Wi-Fi. So for dorms that didn't have Wi-Fi that was reliable, we actually had a 3G router here instead. So the Wi-Fi would go to a router that would transmit this up to a cellular system. And so with that in the cloud now, we could have all the data in one place. And so we kind of interface that to the people who need it in two ways. One of them is to have an integrated dashboard. So this is a single sort of website where dorm operators in this case could log in and see the latest numbers from each one of the residents. The second way we interface with this is through SMS alerts. Oftentimes, when the pandemic is happening, many of the people in charge are just too busy to have time to be staring at this dashboard all the time. And so one thing that they really wanted was to have an SMS alert. So only tell me what is happening if it's important. In that case, send me a notification. And so we actually had this interface with a SMS system as well. So once that data is in the cloud, we do a bit of analysis on it and determine whether or not we should alert. So this interface is to both the residents themselves and also to the operators. So we partnered with Temasek, who had actually procured these pulse oximeters to actually deploy this in a dorm. So around June, we went in and put the system in place. So this is the dashboard. Again, the operator can actually tap on each one of these residents and actually see their time history. So from here, they can hopefully spot trends to see, this is my normal pulse oxygen level, and whether or not that is going below. And this also works for the heart rate as well. So in terms of the SMS alert, again, this is interfaces to both the residents and the operators. For the residents, many of them speak different languages. So we had this program to talk back to them in their preferred language. So as they register for the system, we'll get their preferred language and send the data back to them. We want them to, after they clip the pulse oximeter on, to know if they're okay. So they don't have to rely on interpreting the data themselves. And so every time they take the measurements, they'll get an okay, not okay sort of measurement, sort of text coming back. Also, maybe just as importantly, the text message also acts as a reminder for these individual residents to actually take their measurements. Compliance is a huge, huge issue for this particular problem. You can hand out the pulse oximeters, but if they're not reminded to use them, they're not going to take their measurements. And for the dorm operators, we also send them alert on whether or not individual residents are getting abnormal or normal measurements, just to make sure the number of false, a big issue is really the false positives. You have this, a huge population taking these measurements at the same time. How do we ensure that we don't overwhelm the operator with a bunch of meaningless text messages? So one way we did this was just because it's so easy to put the pulse oximeter on, we can make that system redundant. So basically, if we spot an unusual measurement, we'll actually send a text message to the resident to retake that measurement. And only when you get like 2 sequential abnormal measurements, then we alert the operator. And so the system all put together is really quite simple. Here's the oximeter, you clip it on. The Raspberry Pis, these are installed in every room in the dorm. There's an LED there that flashes on to show that this is actually connected. And so the resident will put on the oximeter, take a look at the device and see if the LED turns on. Once it's green, it means it's okay. The data is actually going up to the cloud. And so we went in and deployed this along with my colleagues, Arthur Tay and Shiche. One interesting thing that we got to do was actually to basically hold a briefing session for the residents who were part of this pilot trial. So the oximeter makes beeping sounds when you clip it on, so you can see a lot of them holding it next to the ear. I'm just kind of curious on how this is working. These are the dorm operators. They're the ones who interface the most with our system. So we have an iPad here that's to show them how to use the interface and how ultimately our goal was to build an interface that relieves the burden on these operators. They're managing a building of thousands of dorm residents. And so the crisis, just hit them quite unprepared. And so hopefully with a system like this, we can relieve the sort of just mind bandwidth that it requires to manage this sort of situation. All right, and so with that system in place, we could collect data from quite a few residents. So here I'm showing you just a sample of the data we've collected over 1 month from 24 different residents. This is the SpO2, the blood oxygen, and this is the heart rate. The color is coded by just the level, and so red means a lot, blue means low heart rate, and same thing with SpO2. Yellow means about 100%. The blue here just drops down to about 90, 94, 90, 93. So one of the interesting things we could do here was actually to track individual, sort of at the population level, in the entire population, we could track individual profiles. So one really insightful thing we found from this pilot study was that what is normal for one person is not necessarily normal for another person. And that sounds really obvious, but if you think about the current way that we're using this data, we're not taking that into account at all. Currently, the alert, the way the recommended clinician way of analyzing this data was to just use a simple threshold. That is, like, if anyone has blood oxygen drop below 94 or 95, then this was considered an abnormal event. But you can see even in this population of 24 residents, and the residents are generally the same age, roughly the same age group, all male. All of them have tested negative for COVID, so we don't have any positive cases in this study. But among this quite uniform cohort, you can see, and of course these are anonymized data, you can see that, you have some people who are just very high blood oxygen all the time, and others that can actually be, what is normal for them is actually quite low, around 96 for this particular case. And so this was really shows that what we should be doing is actually be studying each person as an individual, and we should be tailoring our thresholds to each person, right? So 95 will be very abnormal for this person here, but not so much for this person. And so we should set our alerts accordingly. And so one simple way to do this, this was a post hoc analysis that we did on this data. We ran a Kalman filter to check on the individuals on whether or not we could build individual profiles for each. And you can see we can do so quite reasonably using this sort of analysis. Using sort of the time history of the data as it comes in, we can adjust the threshold to each person. Everyone starts at around 95. As your data comes in, we adjust the threshold accordingly. If your blood oxygen, your SpO2 is consistently high, we move the threshold up. If your blood oxygen is low, we will adjust accordingly. And so like this, we can sort of isolate events that should, to your eye, look abnormal, but otherwise would not be flagged using a large global population threshold. Another important conclusion that came out of our pilot study was the compliance rate of this study. So again, a major challenge was to make sure the residents were actually using these pulse oximeters. And so if you just rely on the operators reminding people manually in the morning every day, that's not going to be an effective way of doing things. So with this sort of electronic way of doing things, we could send text alerts and keep the compliance rate high. Over the study, we were able to keep the compliance around 81%, and this is compliance on taking measurements 4 times a day. So out of each one of those time slots 4 times a day, we could keep a compliance of 81%, which is more than daily measurements for most of these people. And just to show how important the text alerts are, you can see that one resident that didn't have a hand phone, his compliance rate was 20%. So after the study, we've made this technology available for anyone who wants to further use this in the dorms, available to license at no cost. So I want to stop here about talking about my system and sort of point to what this might mean for systems in the future. It's almost trite to say at this point that COVID has sort of accelerated trends that we're seeing, that were happening in the world already. And one of those trends is really healthcare and that's intersection with our mobile technology, with sort of the IT advances that we've seen that have been very, very dramatic over the last few decades. One really insightful article I found on this is work by Eric Topol, who's a major figure in the field of mobile health. I'm just thinking about how our mobile technologies could be used for future healthcare systems. So we've been deployed this simple system, in about 4 weeks. For if we could do this, and not because we're special and we're particularly good, but if anyone could now do this in such a short time, what does that mean for healthcare? Well, beyond pulse oxygen, there's a tremendous number of things we can measure now. Here's it's an incredible picture of all the different parameters that are available to measure using our mobile wearable devices today. And just to point out some particularly exciting ones, can we have pills that you can swallow that can send out information along your entire gastrointestinal tract? Could we measure things like the pH inside your stomach, core body temperature from the inside, or even like microbes inside of my intestine? Could I send that information and have that connected to my healthcare systems? As we've seen with even our small, simple study, just getting that data to one place and being able to analyze over time can produce sort of insights that would never be available if we just relied on a single time point of measurement. And so all these are available today. And so what could that mean for the future? There's another really insightful article that's encourage all of you to look up. This is an article written by Fei-Fei Li about illuminating the dark spaces of healthcare using these sort of systems that we can build today. And the idea is that, you know, we can take incredible measurements from individuals now. We can draw your blood, we can put you in a scanner and see really detailed profile of you at that moment in time. But the moment you step away from the hospital, from the clinic, all that, you know, we don't really know what's going on. And so can we build inside of our daily lives systems that can illuminate these places that are currently dark? And so just a simple picture of, you know, inside a hospital, can we have these, you know, this metaphorical illumination, ways to measure things that are happening that otherwise would escape. So just, you know, today we have, of course, wearables that can do this, cameras, radar, acoustic systems. Can we take that data, translate that to insights? And so this is, I think, is a major challenge and also opportunity for all of the students here today. By, you know, how do we use these amount of advances that we have over the past few decades to realize these health insights concretely for healthcare? And so I want to end with just a simple, funny example of how this can actually play out. This is a study done in the Mayo Clinic. I believe this was about 5 years ago, on using, you know, just a really simple example of using our technology to make healthcare better. So the challenge that they set out to solve was this problem of object retention during surgery. As an engineer, I had no idea about this problem until I saw this article. And the challenge here is that as surgeons operate on patients, they oftentimes forget and leave things inside the patients and close them up. And later they realize during a scan or something, oops, I left something inside. And this happens frequently enough that this is a major challenge. And all surgeon operations have to report, you know, the rate at which this happens. So this is quite significant. One of the things that are most often left behind is the sponges they use during surgery. The Raytech sponge is the most common sort of device. And so in this very simple study, they put RFIDs on each one of these sponges. And so they basically count. As you put the sponges in, you scan the RFID, and then and so once you know the amount of sponges you put in, you can count the number that comes out and make sure everything came out. And so just this incredibly simple system, they could reduce the rate of object retention from 16 days, once every 16 days, to once every 69 days. And I thought this was an incredible example of just how, you know, simple applications of this technology can really change patients' lives. So with that, I'll stop here. I want to thank all of the people who are involved in this project, Professor Xicheng Yang and Arthur Tay, as well as the students Jermin Lai and Salman, who are involved in this.
Thanks, John. Very interesting work, and nice example at the end as well. I'm sure all of us have seen one of these scenes in the numerous medical dramas, which is an interesting topic always to feature. Okay, so now it's time for Q&A. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. But before we go to that, I have a question to both of you. So very interesting work. And I am very curious to hear from both of you about how fast and dynamic your innovation process was for these technologies which you discussed. All of us know that these were very evolving and volatile situations when you started off working on this. Was this something which you were working on already in your domain, or was this something which you pivoted to when the situation arose? And also, if you could touch upon how how interesting was your interaction with the various stakeholders, and what were probably perhaps 2 key learnings which you take away for times to come from these experiences? If we can hear from Anand first, and then Dr. Ho.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So, we've been on this journey to build our next generation wearable for last couple of years. And at that point, again, our focus was primarily on how do we bring in the wearable into sort of patient deterioration in hospital, and then, support early discharge outside of hospital. We knew that, vital signs, particularly respiratory rate, is a very critical, and so we're focused on that. At that time, we've heard a lot about the use of wearables in the consumer sector as well. And so from that standpoint, we are in a big, Philips is a big company. We have a standard processes, so we would kind of designed to launch according to that. We had our value proposition. We had, knew there was a, need. We developed a solution. We validated it. The COVID was very interesting. In fact, at least in the US, we really weren't even taken seriously until February, probably March, right? As everybody knows. And in fact, I was doing the sales training in Europe, and I arrived in February. Nobody was wearing masks. I wasn't. I've never worn mask before. And come March, we're all working from home. And guess what? We were still waiting for our CE mark. And as soon as that Europe, was needing technology like this, we really were working so hard with our local regulatory to make sure that we can get the CE mark very, very quickly. We looked for all options to accelerate, emergency use. I know FDA had emergency use in the US. So regulatory pathways was first of all, right? The very, very interesting. And second was that, again, in a typical installation, you would follow the process. You go through your normal channels of doing the, technical installation, clinical training, things like that. We didn't have any of those channels available during the COVID times. So how do you take a product that you just received a CE mark and just launched, that that the market hasn't been quite trained hands-on the ground, to then directly take it to the customer, install it, again, with the constraints that I mentioned before. You're not allowed to go inside the isolation ward. You have to do it in phases. That required really creation of the plan pretty rapidly, coordinating in multiple different geographics, multiple different functions for us. And then, obviously, I think we were looking for very quick feedback, so that we could, sort of make sure that the customer is getting the right value from this. And so we were really working near 24/7 at that point, right? Because we wanted to make sure that we knew exactly what was going on when the solution was installed, what kind of data they're saying, are they, what fine tuning we need to do. We even did a software release for our infrastructure based on some feedback we received. So a very, very interesting time. So I would say first learning is definitely that, and again, in this case, there was no foresight, right? But you definitely have to understand your use case. And since then, we've changed a lot of our deployment methods, in terms of processes and training. We've changed that. Also, what we learned, and it wasn't a huge, I guess, enlightenment, but we knew, SpO2 obviously is one of the vital signs. We've known about that, but we've also taken an approach, from respiratory rate, and we've seen in patient deterioration, SpO2 can be late indicator. But in COVID times, it was all of a sudden very important, and we knew that was needed as well. So I think now we have taken that, how can we soon bring an SpO2 into our solution as well? Because we know that once oxygenation, the other is ventilation, but we have a huge demand now that, hey, we want, temperature as well. So at the moment, we're very actively working on how to bring that all in.
Yeah, I want to just, Anand described it really well. And I just want to second that, when COVID happened, it was a lot of the slow processes that we're used to, methodical ways of doing things, that sort of went out the door. And it was just, what is the problem? How do we solve it? And so maybe one thing I want to add was just the importance of having simple solutions. I think as engineers, we oftentimes over-engineer things. And so it was, as simple as putting up some Raspberry Pis. If that could help, and that could address the challenge, you as students could make a difference, right?
Thank you.
If I make a quick comment on that, that is
Sure.
very creative solution, John. I'm very impressed by the solution, the architecture, that deployment. If I may ask you a quick follow-up question there, I know you mentioned compliance was an issue. Did your team consider a SpO2 device that could be potentially just worn on the wrist? So instead of having to use this that you had to stick your finger in once in a while, do you think that would have helped with the compliance?
Yeah, I think we're quite interested in a wrist-based solution for a while, and I know like the Apple Watch. Not that you would buy tens of thousands of Apple Watches, but but the Apple Watch does have pulse oximeter option now. I think one of the things was we didn't want to, given the short time span we had, we didn't want to have to revalidate the pulse oximetry, and so if you go with a finger clip, that's accepted. That was something that we could move quickly with.
Thank you. We have one question from Alfred Tan. So he says the biosensor is part of a telehealth system which requires remote monitoring, and increasingly healthcare workers' roles are expanding. But do you also see that hospitals are specifically scheduling time out for telehealthing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very interesting that pre-COVID, you had the whole telehealth, right? Sort of different use case outside of hospital. We know that that's done generally for chronic kind of cases. You could use any number of devices, consumer devices. Also, you can use as a part of the telehealth portfolio. After the COVID, so even before COVID, we knew that there was a very increasing trend on it costs a lot of money to keep a patient in a hospital. And if you could just move that patient, outside of hospital, at home, let's say even first few days where the risk of, deterioration, readmission might be higher. So what you're doing is you're having a hospital level care just outside of hospital at home, costs a lot less money. But with COVID, I think then what we heard was, hey, we also want to now send. You basically a temporary setup. You patients in, some are COVID, they go intubated, whatever. Some stay there for observation. Obviously, they can't keep them forever. They want to send home. So a lot of questions we got was, hey, can we send home with your biosensor? Now in US, we did get an emergency. Sort of enforcement discretion, which allowed us to do that, even though we're not cleared for home use today. The Europe was slightly different. So since then, now what we've done in phases, we have now cleared the sensor for use in nursing home, and we're working on also now to get it cleared all the way to the home.
Thank you. John, would you like to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I'm not a clinician, so I don't get to decide. but I think that, like Anand says, as we build biosensors that can reach the reliability that we get in the clinic, I feel like that's inevitable. Even after the pandemic, I'm going to have more Zoom calls with my students because it's. I think the same will apply for healthcare.
Yeah, I think the future of work and research is definitely going to transform, and it's already happening. Thank you both again for sharing your very interesting works with us, and for your time, especially Anand, late at night for you. If I can ask all the panelists to turn on your camera, we can quickly take a group picture before we head for a short break.
Sure, thank you very much.
Sorry, give me a moment. I try to put everyone into the same frame. Remove. Okay, view, gallery view. Okay, everyone, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let me take one more. 3, 2, 1. Smile. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hansong. Thank you again, John and Anand. So with that, we come to the end of our theme session 1. We now will head for a short break, but before that, we do have a short video message from Philips, our sponsors.
Okay.
What patient care challenges do you face today? Are you looking to simplify life for a clinical staff stretched to the limit? Remove complexity as a barrier to faster decision-making? Reduce variability in care delivery? Integrate emerging technologies with your IT systems and EMR? No matter what your challenges, they all revolve around your ability to watch over your patients and provide the best care possible wherever it takes place. Philips Patient Monitoring is more than a network of bedside and mobile devices strung together and connected to a central station. It's an integrated solution that fits securely into your hospital's IT environment to help drive clinical and economic outcomes. It captures a steady stream of patient data from monitors and medical devices, then feeds it automatically to your EMR for virtually gap-free patient records from admission to discharge, even during transport. Philips Patient Monitoring solution taps the power of advanced clinical decision support tools to help you detect the onset of critical events like sepsis and pneumonia, so clinicians can make informed care decisions. And it gives on-the-move caregivers virtually anywhere, anytime visibility to a patient's vital signs, waveforms, and alarms, so they can communicate and collaborate to decide on the best course of care and the right caregiver to provide it. Philips bedside, transport, and mobile monitors all share the same interface to reduce complexity, minimize training, and support the consistent delivery of quality care at every level of acuity. Plus, this comprehensive patient monitoring solution works with your current IT system to help you make the most of your investment, while risk-based, defense-in-depth security helps protect the privacy of patients and integrity of data. Philips works with you right from the start and at every stage of ownership to help you customize and standardize your patient monitoring solution to your hospital, your protocols, and your people. Philips Patient Monitoring is a total solution designed around your challenges and backed by ongoing consulting, training, service, and support to help you achieve your clinical and economic goals, so you can confidently deliver quality care everywhere it matters. At Philips, there is always a way to make life better. Innovation and you, Philips.
So thanks again to Philips for kindly sponsoring the Singapore Healthcare Engineering Forum 2020. So with that, yes.
Sorry, Aishwarya, we have one more clip from Philips.
Oh, sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
The first wisdom of IT is that everything works best when everything works together. To seamlessly integrate new technologies into your IT infrastructure and EMR. To shield your clinical and information systems from malware, ransomware, and identity theft. To provide on-the-go caregivers with visibility to every patient's changing condition and comprehensive medical history. To support the delivery of consistent quality care wherever it takes place. Philips Patient Monitoring solution is up to the challenge. Our pre-tested, standards-based approach to IT design and architecture supports compatibility, security compliance, and interoperability. A single technology framework collects patient data, waveforms, settings, and alarms from a broad range of medical devices and streams it to your bedside monitors and central station. It enables you to connect your equipment and systems to your hospital's clinical network, regardless of technology or vendor, so everyone who needs to can access and share vital patient information. and it translates clinical data into industry-standard languages, giving you a single interface with your EMR to capture virtually gap-free patient monitoring data from admission to discharge. With Philips, you can tap the power of Defense in-Depth security to help protect the privacy of patients and integrity of monitoring data. Leverage your own virtualized servers to reduce operating costs and increase uptime, and take advantage of your existing wired or wireless network to reduce the total cost of ownership over time. Plus, you can count on ongoing consulting, training, service, and support to address your evolving challenges and deliver consistent quality patient care everywhere it matters. Innovation in you, Philips.
Are we good to go, Hanso?
Yes, we pass it back to you, Aishwarya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lovely 2 videos from Philips. With that, we will have a short break. Do grab your coffees, teas, and be back at 11:20 when we continue with the next session on diagnostics. Thank you.